Good afternoon. Welcome to a workshop for the City Council of the City of Oak Harbor. We have our a council here today and some staff. I'd like to call this workshop, it is October 26th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order. There will be both a physical meeting and a virtual meeting. Some members of our city staff and consultants are participating via teleconference. Guests that are included in staff presentations will be excused from the Ring Central meeting at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. Today's meeting may be viewed live on cable channel 10, HD 1090. The meeting will be available on YouTube after the meeting. Our first item on our agenda is finance, Mayor's preliminary 2023-2024 biennial budget presentation. This is that presentation of the preliminary biennial budget. This afternoon we will hear from the city administrator, finance director, and staff regarding the development services, human services, Public Works and Parks and Recreation, including the Marina and Senior Services budgets. On Tuesday, November 1, you will hear additional public safety presentations from the police and fire chiefs. I want to thank the finance team for putting this preliminary budget together. It is not an easy task, and they have brought this document forward to City Council while working on the state audit and normal operations they are responsible for addressing every day. This two-year budget is based on the objective of providing city services as we recover from the COVID pandemic, continuing to work towards employee morale with programs and services that show how much we value our employees. Additionally, we are balancing the budget and adding to our overall fund balance by creating capital project funding with a focus on identifying grant opportunities to decrease cost impacts to residents and providing a reduction in utility rates to benefit our ratepayers. I encourage the community to review the preliminary budget on the city's website. Budget public hearings will be held on November 15th, 2022 at 6 p.m. and November 30, 2022 at 2 p.m. You can submit comments at www.oakharbor.gov/public comment. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to City Administrator Blaine Olborn, and Blaine will present the budget highlights. And then I guess we'll go from him to Mr. Goldman, and you'll take care of that. Okay,
yep.
Blaine?
Go ahead. I thank you, Mayor, for the overview, and I'll kind of go ahead and give a highlight here, a few slides, and then we have our expert here, our Finance Director, David Goldman, to really dive a little deeper, and then even more deeper when we go into the department head, or department and city leadership presentations later on in this presentation. So with that, certainly a lot of discussion on the 32 priorities and kind of combined it into the categories there for the council priorities, and I really think the budget incorporates a lot of this priorities in here with economic development and downtown revitalization, utility, infrastructure and utility rates, and park and recreation, and then city employees, the mayor kind of highlighted. And then certainly we do have on the ballot the fire bond and the fire levy. So we'll kind of talk about how that's covered in the budget there, since it's still subject to the voters in November 8th on whether we get those additional revenue or not. So next slide, please. Certainly on personnel, we can always use additional staff. Some additional staff will be highlighted if we do get the bond passed, but the overall budget presented here is not a significant increase in staffing here. And then on the general fund revenue here. Looks like a lot, but when you start looking at inflation there, the net of that is still somewhat behind what inflation does here. And then it assumes the council's going to go ahead and approve the 1% increase that you're allowed to do in the budget. So we're assuming that in the revenue. So next slide, 2, please. Under special revenue, transportation is really our area that's mentioned heavily in the budget here, that we're having issues with the motor vehicle fuel tax, and the capped run is an extra fuel tax that we get for being on an island. It's just not keeping pace with inflation, and we did use some other funds to keep the expenditures going in those areas there. And that's primarily for operations and arterials. And then fortunately, the voters in 2019 passed the 2% sales tax, and that's going really well, and we've got a lot of great projects there. Creative Arts Fund is an option, an extra utility tax. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. And then civic improvements is basically our LTAC, we call it. Lodging tax is going well and bounced back, and about $300,000 per year. And then senior services has some issues. They're bouncing back, and we pretty much kept the transfer from the general fund study there. So moving on to the next slide. Debt service, certainly we're keeping our bond rating up and have the funds to pay off our debt. REIT is actually somewhat conservative. It did bounce up, and our finance director will go in that, but we want to be conservative on that because it's certainly based on activity. Utility funds, I think we've had a lot of discussion on that with the decrease, and then hopefully keeping flat thereon. And then we're still having discussions on the system development charge, so we did not budget any increase in that. It's really dependent upon the council or the policy decision there. So, and then Marina budgeted some annual increases there, continuing, assuming the continuation of 3% per year. And then it was a good thing we turned around and retired that debt, and then got a great interest rate that's no longer available. So very, very good thing there. And Internal Services Fund continued to progress as normal. And then moving on to the next slide, we'll go ahead and go to our Finance Director, David Goldman.
Okay, thank you, Blaine, and the mayor. David Goldman, Finance Director. So the budget document that you all have printed out and also online is divided up into a number of sections. The very first section is the mayor's budget message, which we went over in brief a few minutes ago. The next section contained the council priorities goals that we were able to put together from the retreat and from the meeting we had a few weeks ago. Then we move on to the preliminary budget highlights for the biennial, which Blaine just went over in brief. Then the next section contains the Oak Harbor's organizational structure. That's the department organizational structure. We also have the fund organizational structure as well. The next section are our comprehensive financial policies. Those haven't changed over the last few years. We're going to take a close look at them coming up in the next year, and we will recommend any changes if needed to the City Council for review and approval. So our city's financial structure is the next section in the budget. We have two major areas of funds. We have our governmental funds and our proprietary funds. Within the governmental funds, we have the general fund, we have the special revenue funds, we have debt service funds, and we have capital project funds. In the proprietary fund section, we have our enterprise funds and our internal service funds. And those are broken out in further detail within the budget book. So our budget process this year, we implemented a new process called the base budget. What that simply is we took the operational expense lines that are generally thought of to be under department heads' controls. So, for example, we would take supplies and professional services and those kind of areas that are seen to be under more direct control by the department heads, create an overall base based on trend, and provide that number to them for 2023 to 24. And if they need more funding in those particular lines than what has been provided to them in the base budget amount, they would submit decision package forms for review, consideration, and approval by the city administration. In addition, if a department needed a new personnel, requested a new personnel for their areas, they would submit those on forms. And then we had a separate capital project process like we do every year, but for the biennial, it's a little bit more intense because we're planning for the next 2 years of the budget in addition to the 6 years in the CIP. So speaking of decision packages, here is the list of approved decision packages that were included in this preliminary budget. What we have here, it's a pretty busy chart. So we broke it up into 2023, and the next slide will be 24. We broke it up by funding source. So these bold areas are where the funding is coming from. And then we have two columns. The first column is the total expense. The second column is really the net fiscal impact. And I'll give some examples of what we mean by that. So if you go down here, let me create a better pointer option, laser point. So if you go down here to police jail costs, we're continuing, and Kevin will go into this in more detail next week, but we're continuing to increase our usage of the, our contracted out jail score, I believe is the term for it. And so those costs, those professional services costs went up by $267,000 for 23. However, that is offset by a reduction in two non-police officers that worked in our, internal jail for a total net impact of $42,000. That's an example of the difference between what the total expense is and what the true impact is when you deduct other items that are no longer going to be in the budget going forward. These are all contained within the budget book. Rather than go into detail of each one of these right here, we will be talking about these during the department presentations, which will be occurring later on in the meeting. But just to give the overall net fiscal impact is about $500,000 in all funds in 2023. In 2024, the total decision package net fiscal impact is about $250,000. And that's, of course, deducting out, this is the total expenses, but that's deducting out the items that offset those costs. For example, again, the police jail item is in here again. There's that ongoing deduction of that personnel expense. So therefore, when you add these all up, the total net fiscal impact to all funds is about $250,000 for 2024. And that is included in the budget, the overall budget numbers that you do have in that budget book. As far as personnel changes go, for 2023, the overall expense reduction is $320,000, but the net fiscal impact is actually an increase of $24,000. For example, we're reducing the in-house assistant city attorney, prosecuting attorney. The savings is $151,000. However, that's offset by an increase in prosecution professional service expenses or legal expenses. So when you take the deduction and add the increase in that in legal expenses, you end up with a net reduction of $20,000. So it's still a savings over doing it in-house. So that's how that works. 2 seasonal laborers are being added to the Parks Department. That's an increase of $30,000. And here are those 2 police support corrections folks that we talked about earlier in the decision packages, which is offset by the increase in jail costs. As far as for the personnel changes go, those are completely absorbed by the increase in jail costs. So the net impact here is 0. And for the total impact on the general fund for 23 is just under $10,000 of those changes. For the Marina Fund, we have 1 seasonal laborer included. That's about $15,000 a year. And for the senior services, we have 4 part-time fitness instructors. Each one's a quarter FTE for a total of 1 FTE. The impact of that is 10,000. However, it's really a net fiscal impact of 0 because any part-time fitness instructors that are brought on will be offset by a reduction in professional services expenses. And Liz will go into more detail on that when she presents her budget. For 24, everything I mentioned prior continues. However, there is an increase in 0.4 FTEs for a part-time HR assistant. That expense is budgeted at around $30,000 for 2024. So the next section in the budget book is our budget calendar. We talked about the retreat a little earlier. That happened back in March. The city council adopted a decrease in utility rates in September. We had our mandatory revenue projection public hearing in September. Today is the presentation of the preliminary budget. We'll have a meeting next week to go over public safety, police and fire department presentations. The city clerk will publish the notice of preliminary budget that's required by RCW. And as the mayor talked about earlier, we have a meeting set up for November 15th, and we have a meeting set up for November 30th to go over the budgets and adopt the budget. So the biennial budget is broken up into different funds, and here are the fund categories. About half of the biennial budget are enterprise funds, and those funds consist of our utilities funds and marina fund. The general fund is the next largest piece of the pie, about a quarter of our overall budget. Then we have our internal service funds. There's 5 of them. 3 of them are reserved for replacements, and 2 of them are our shop ops, which contains engineering and most of our public works operations. And also we have our vehicle repair and facilities fund as well. Our special revenue funds consist mostly of our transportation funds, our senior center funds, our LTAC, our arts fund, our creative arts fund. And then we have some specific capital project funds. That's our REIT funds and some specific capital projects funds. Most of the other funds you see here, like general fund and enterprise funds, they all have their specific capital projects. Like, for example, the water fund has a water capital projects funds that's found within this enterprise pie. These capital projects funds are specifically called out because the REIT funds per state law have to be put in this category, but we also have a Portland Lose Fund and we have a Windjammer Park Fund that are contained within this capital project slice. And then we have a very small debt service fund. So all funds revenue. So I broke up, just so it's kind of a little bit easier to digest and understand, I broke up our revenues into 4 major categories. We have our recurring revenues, which pay for, the bulk of these revenues pay for our operations, our ongoing operations, and these revenues tend to be stable over time. You can see that these recurring revenues are going up about 2, maybe 2.5%, depending on the year that you're looking at. Our non-recurring revenues generally fund capital projects. You'll see bond proceeds, CARES or ARPA, grants. These are grants, other grants than CARES or ARPA, and then insurance recoveries. We have some categories that are a mix. The mix contains a lot of miscellaneous type of funds, which are mostly operating, but some are like one time and they go to capital, but there's a lot of them. So what we did is we just put them in this category here, and you can see that they're generally stable, but sometimes we get a one-time amount to pay for capital projects, and you'll see it pop up, like for example in 2021. And then finally we have our interfund revenues. We have our interfund allocations, mostly from our internal service funds, and then we have the transfers in from various funds, and mostly those transfers in are to pay for capital projects. We have our expenditure trends for all funds. The top, we broke this up into 7 different categories. The first category are capital projects. You can see in 2023, that's about $22 million. In 24, it goes down to $11.6 million. A lot of these capital projects are either funded by bond proceeds, if the vote, depending on how the vote goes in a couple weeks, or by grants. We have our debt category, and that's most of this debt is related to the clean water facility. We have a depreciation category. We don't budget for depreciation per SAO guidelines, but we do have to report on the financials the actual results. These are non-cash items that just have to be put on the financials based on generally accepted accounting principles and SAO guidelines. We have our interfund charges that we talked about earlier. We have our operation and maintenance rows. That is generally our supplies and our operational costs, our professional services, and so on, and also the non-capital portion of the capital projects. Most capital projects expense accounts are in these, I don't want to get too detailed, but it's in the 6,000 accounts, but some of those accounts are not considered the 6,000. So we have to budget them in the other accounts, the 3,000s or the 4,000s and so on, and those end up showing up in this operating and maintenance row. Personnel, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's salary and benefits for our employees. And then we have the transfers between funds. This chart contains our full-time equivalent positions. Currently in 2022, that stands at about 170. In 2023, that'll decrease slightly to just under 169. And in 2024, that's scheduled to go up slightly to just around 169. But overall, it's showing a decrease from where it is today. So now we'll look at the different funds. First, we'll look at the revenue sources, and then we'll go on to the overall revenue and expenditures for the funds. For the general fund, the major revenue sources consist of sales tax, property tax, our utility taxes and franchise fees. We have to budget our unencumbered, or what we call beginning fund balance. That's a resource, not so much a revenue. And then we have everything else. All the other miscellaneous revenues that come in are there. And these are all detailed out in the budget book and the backup to the agenda bill. For the general fund, these are the expenditures by department. You'll see the city administrator. It's going down to 0 in 23 and 24 because the city administrator department is proposed to be combined with the mayor department, and the name will be changed to mayor/executive administration. In addition, we're adding in the council-approved economic development coordinator to this department. We have the city council department. This has increased, well, there are some different benefit choices that were made based on, a new council member that's come on, and that had some effect on the amount of the budget, but overall pretty much stays in line with what's happened in the past. With development services, we have some increases based on some mostly grant-funded initiatives and projects that they'll be working on during the biennial, which they'll go over during the departmental presentation. Emergency services, it's pretty much straightforward and the same. Finance is just kind of going up by trend or inflation. Fire is increasing here mostly because of if the fire bond passes, there'll be some engineering costs related to the fire bond, which need to be budgeted within the operational area of the fire department. If it doesn't pass, this will change. We'll come in and we'll do an amendment for the city council for various items. If it does pass, of course, if the lid lift passes, we'll come back and do an amendment to include the revenues and expenses for the levy lid lift as well. But we'll give more information after we know more in 2 weeks. General government tends to vary depending on one-time revenues. In 22, we had to amend the budget for all the ARPA revenues that has come in. And going forward, we do have it's pretty flat between 23 and 24. It does include some transfers and so on regarding either ARPA or other capital projects that have been budgeted. Human resources is pretty flat. It did increase because they now have the payroll function of the city. And also we did talk about that 0.4 FTE in the personnel section a few slides before. For judicial, it's just pretty straightforward. For law, it's also pretty straightforward. Library too. pretty straightforward. Talked about the mayor and executive administration. Parks, it's just, it includes all the initiatives and position changes and items that we'll be going over later during the parks presentation. And police as well. This includes increasing costs for either SCORE, some other items, and also, we have an approved bargaining agreement that the City Council approved last year. Next slide. This is our transportation revenue. It includes the transportation funds that are in the special revenue funds. We did talk about this last month, how the CAPRON and the motor vehicle fuel tax and other transportation type funding is not generally increasing because it's all based on motor vehicle purchases. And it's not based on the dollar amount of the purchases, but it's based on the amount, the number of gallons purchased. And that's pretty much flatlined since 2007. The only exception is the Transportation Benefit District sales tax. Because that's a sales tax, it is based on the value of the items purchased, and that does go up over time, depending on inflation and the economy. The state may have a fix for city transportation funding coming up in the next year or two. We're not sure what that'll look like, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to get, all cities will be able to get more funding to fund the increasing costs of transportation improvements without having to go back to our own citizens and ask them for additional funds. I just put these two funds together, but they're not really together, but for the purposes of presentation, I put Creative Arts and the Lodging Tax Civic Tourism Fund together. You can see that the Creative Arts Fund, which does get their funding from a 0.25% utility tax on 3 of our utilities, that's projected to, just pretty much flatline or go up just barely like 1% or so. And our LTAC funding is estimated to be about $310,000 per year. 2021 was a very good year. We're projecting a bit lower for 22. For 23, we took a look at 21, and we just said, this looks like it might be around trend. We could make adjustments to this if we see things coming in a little bit lower. We can make adjustments to that, but that's what we have in the budget for now. For senior services, this is how the budget looks. There's a peak here in 23 because of 2 capital projects. It's the second phase of the roof and also the generator. But as Blaine mentioned before, the general fund support amount of $200,000 is budgeted to stay even for the next, for the upcoming biennial budget. Our real estate excise taxes, they've done very well in 2021 during the period of high real estate activity. Things have dropped off over the last 4 months, so we're projecting that to be around $900,000 or so for both of those funds. And for 23 and 24, we set it at $1 million just to kind of be more in line with past year's trends. Utility tax revenues are budgeted at the exact amounts that were provided by the utility rate consultant. So you can see what those numbers look like here. And you could also see that for wastewater, due to the decrease, it is lower in 23 than 22 and increases slightly just based on assumptions for new customers and so on. But the rates themselves are going down by 3% and they're staying at that level for another 2 years. The marina revenue, different components are located here. The mortgage rates are going up slightly by 3% each year. At least that's what's budgeted and proposed. Our fuel cost did go up in 2022, which is why you see this number much higher than 21, where we anticipate those going back to trend for 23 and 24, but it's really hard to predict, those kind of costs. Those costs are very volatile. So that's why you see a bit of a peak here in 22. All the other costs we have here are pretty much per trend. So moving on from the specific revenues, we can look at the different major funds that we have to see how the revenues stack up against the expenses. So we went back to 2021 to show actual revenues and expenses. We show our projected revenue and expenses for this year, and then we'll show what we budgeted for 23 and 24. So starting at the beginning of 23, you'll see that our budgeted beginning unencumbered fund balance for the general fund is about $3.4 million. When all is said and done, based on what we have budgeted, we're anticipating that to go up by $641,000. And that's in addition to what we're projecting out for the rest of this year, which is also anticipated to go up by 641 from the beginning of 22. In 24, we're projecting to use a little under $300,000, but the overall increase from the beginning of the biennial to the end of the biennial is about $400,000 for the general fund of our unencumbered fund balance. Our streets fund, as you can see, we had a higher fund balance back in 21. It's been decreasing. And you can see that it's continuing to decrease based on what we know now and what we project the current revenues that we have. We'll probably have to revisit this a little bit later during the biennial so we can get a better sense on how to continue to fund streets projects and also street staff in light of the fact that the current knowledge of the revenues that they currently have in place is not really increasing with inflation. Hopefully the state has come up with a solution, because we're not the only city that's facing this challenge. Cities throughout Washington state are facing this, this challenge for transportation funding. Our Creative Arts Fund is right here. You can see that it starts at around 277,000. About 20,000 is budgeted, and that'll, because revenues are about 60,000 a year, that will increase the fund balance. Obviously, as things happen throughout the year, council will deliberate on any projects that come up, and based on the results of that deliberation and direction from council, we could put a budget amendment in here and utilize whatever resources the city council deems necessary for whatever projects come up. Our lodging tax fund, our civic improvement / lodging tax fund, that is where the lodging tax advisory committee meets, deliberates, and provides a recommendation to city council, which should be happening later this month or early in December. We budgeted the full $500,000 that the city council authorized for this, and depending on the results of that meeting, of the recommendation, and what the city council decides to fund, it may come in lower than that, or it may come in at that. We don't know what's going to happen in 2024 as of yet. We are waiting for the next round to occur, which will occur during the summer or late summer of 2024. And also we'll know a little bit more of the multi-year grants too, based on city council action later this year. This is our senior services funds. You can see that there's the fund balance, $100,000 in 23. This is the generator, goes down a bit, but it stays generally steady from the end of 23 to 2024 as far as their fund balance goes. The water funds, you can see that the water fund actually grows its fund balance, and that also includes the transferring of fund balance to the encumbered section of our fund balance sheet for rate funded system reinvestment. These are the amounts that were contained within the rate study that the consultant did put together. Our wastewater funds is also, it's growing slightly. It's pretty much keeping their unencumbered fund balance the same compared to the beginning of the biennial over here in 2023. So yeah, that's based on, the approved rates and the rate study information that the consultant put together. This is our solid waste. The fund balance is increasing there based on what was put together by the consultant. And finally, our last utility, our storm drain fund, we are transferring this amount, which was in the rate study, to our rate funded system reinvestment reserve that is in the storm drain fund. And you can see even with that, we are increasing our unencumbered fund balance from the beginning of the biennial to the end of the biennial. Our marina fund starts at about $1.7 million. There is a capital project, not really a capital project, but a project that's mostly professional services, which is why it's in this category. But that is related to a marina improvements capital project, which will be going over all the capital projects later during CAC's presentation, which is coming up after the departmental presentations. But as you can see, after that's done, the unencumbered fund balance does stay approximately the same at the end of 2024. These are our internal service funds. The first one is our vehicle repair funds. Fund balance pretty much stays the same as it is in the beginning. For our internal service funds, all the revenues generated, except for like one-time revenues like grants or other items that might come in, are funded by every other department in the city. Our equipment replacement fund, this is for mostly all the city vehicles and other equipment that we do have. Fund balance is decreasing, but that is because we are budgeting for a bunch of replacements in 23, which is consistent with our long-term replacement schedule. Our facility replacement fund is growing. It's a relatively new fund compared to the other internal service funds. And there is a replacement that is budgeted in 23. I believe it's for covered storage over in Public Works. Our technology replacement fund is for our software and hardware replacements. And as you can see, it's decreasing to 272 based on our schedules for replacements, but obviously over time that will grow, and the replacement funds tend to go up and tend to go down depending on the amount needed in a particular year and the replacement schedules. But overall, they are sustainable for the long term because they do have long-term replacement schedules that they do follow. And finally, our shop facility fund. This is where our engineering department and our public works, or most of our public works staff are budgeted out of and operations are budgeted out of. Since it's an internal service fund, it gets all its funding from other departments and other funds. And you can see the fund balance does increase by the end of 2024. And these are the revenues and expenditures related to the operations. And this second to final slide is our long-term capital plan overview, which we'll be going over during CAC's presentation coming up after the department presentations. Our total long-term capital plan amounts that are budgeted for 2023 and 24 are $36.1 million. And over the 6 years, it's around $80 million. And it's broken up into different areas. We have governmental, we have water, we have our wastewater funds, we have our vehicles, which is that internal service fund, and then we have some of our other funds located here. And the final slide, Blaine Oborn, our city administrator, will present.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mayor, if we'll just go right into the department presentations. We'll go in this order. Start off with the mayor and executive administration, human resources, finance, development services, park and recreation, and then public works, and then tie up with a little discussion there on our part of public works, and then go on to the capital improvement plan as a separate one. So let's go ahead and transition our slides. And I will go ahead and start off. Blaine Oborn, Oak Harbor City Administrator. Just a quick overview on the mayor's budget. I think our finance director mentioned that it just made sense to combine the city administrator and the mayor's. They were always in two different budgets, but we function as one unit and we share the staff, so it made sense just to combine those. And then as part of the ARPA funding, there was the approval for the economic development position that we're recruiting for right now. So I'll go ahead and cover legal next here. We talked about earlier here the transition from a in-house city attorney doing the prosecuting to a contracted one for a savings of $20,000. So, and on to the next slide here. General government's kind of a catch-all area here. So these are some of the ones that aren't talked about as one of the other department heads, so I just kind of cover this miscellaneous kind of section here, and then some of these items are in the capital improvement plan that we'll talk about later too. So curb broadband grant, I think we've had discussions on that at council, so it's a $50,000 grant, and so the net of the city contribution is $5,000 here. EPA Pioneer Way reuse study. That's $800,000, but that's zero to the city. There's zero grant. So we have a goal to apply for that for the 1081 Pioneer Way property that we're in the process of purchasing. And then some of the things in City Hall here, we need to do some upgrades with key card readers here for $13,000 and 23. City generator is part of the ARPA funding there. And then City Hall remodel, I think council probably will want to discuss further, but we could talk about that in capital projects. But staff did some analysis here, and this is upstairs and downstairs are two different projects, but the totals are combined here for discussion here in summary for $50,000 in 2023 and $320,000 in fiscal year 24, and those are funded using our REAP funding. And lastly, it's time about every 6 to 7 years to do a class and compensation study. So we put $100,000 in that, and that's part of the being sensitive to employees, and I think that's something that the employees really want us to keep our, for non-reps, since we don't bargain with them, that's the way we determine whether we're paying them fairly. So with that, we'll go ahead and go to our Human Resources Director, Emma House. So with that, I think our videographer's doing a good job of advancing the slides, so you just tell him next slide, and he'll go ahead and advance it for you.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. Here to present on the Human Resources Department, Emma House, Human Resources Director. Thank you. I'm not going to read through all of the details on the slides, but just to give you a brief overview of all the services that Human Resources does provide to all of your employees. There is usually about 172 full-time employees, and including our paid-on-call firefighters, 172 employees that we service and that we provide services and customer service to regarding all of these different things. So recruitment is obviously a big one for us. Compensation, classification, training and development, benefit administration is really big as we're moving into our open enrollment season right now. And we also do take care of some committees, the Central Safety Committee, the Civil Service Commission, the Left Wind Disability Board, our Salary Commission, and the Wellness Committee. So those are some employee-driven committees that are extremely important and very valuable to us, and then also some services that we provide to our retired members for the Left Wind Board, and then our Civil Service Commission, which is specific to police and fire. Next slide. So during 21 and 2022, we feel like we had a lot of great accomplishments, mainly focusing on team building, bringing our health and wellness and safety focuses together. We do have a really great wellness committee, and we also have a really great safety committee. And part of the focus from the Association of Washington Cities is to bring those together for an integrated overall health and well-being of your employee workforce. So we have a really big focus on that partnership. We did conduct the all-hands meeting back in 2019 in person. We did a virtual one in 2021, and then we are planning for the all-hands meeting this November. We also did all-staff training. We had the employee picnic. We did a really great mindfulness gratitude program, which was really well received and appreciated by our employees. We've done the PEEPS contest through the Wellness Committee, our pumpkin carving contest, a lot of really fun events for the employees to get engaged and to hopefully have some social time with each other outside of their normal work hours. Well, during their normal work hours, but outside of their normal duties. One of the things that I have said over and over again since COVID started was grace in space. That's kind of been the running theme from Human Resources, is to make sure that we're giving all of our employees some grace and some space during this very different time that we experienced. It was not easy. It was definitely difficult in many different areas for many different reasons, but I'm very proud of all the employees and what they've accomplished. I'm very proud to see how we've come along in the budget process and very excited for our future. Our future goal is to achieve the WorkSafe Employer designation through the Association of Washington Cities. We have been a Well City recipient for many, many years. It's an extremely prideful achievement for us, and to achieve the WorkSafe Employer as well would be really great. So that's going to be the focus for the next 2 years from Human Resources, working with our wellness and safety committees. Next slide. And I also wanted to share just a couple of comments. We did have our all-staff training, and I am very appreciative of the feedback that we get. Anytime we do training, it's super helpful. And I'm also very pleased to see that there has been a lot of positive feedback. There's been a lot of helpful comments and criticism for us to take back and really assess and determine if we are offering the right level and type of training. So just wanted to share a couple of those comments. The staff is very appreciative. We especially had a recent training in September, and it was about reducing workplace stress and kind of coming back, recharging yourself, finding that new energy. And that was really helpful, and I do feel like there's been a little bit of a shift within our workforce this year. So that's extremely exciting. And we are moving into open enrollment. And in the world of health benefits, there has been some increases for your employees in the cost share. So luckily, during the last year, we were able to change our cost share for the health insurance premiums. We were doing a 75-25% cost share. That's increased to 80%, 20%, which was a great benefit for our employees. But you will see for 2023, there are some increases coming forward for our medical plans. So Regents has a 4.5% increase, which is our Health First 250 plan and our high deductible health plan. And then our Kaiser plan has a 7% increase. So definitely there is going to be a little bit of an impact to the employees that they will see in 2023, which is why it's really important for us to keep up with our cost of living adjustment. Okay. And then this slide is a little bit hard to see. I apologize for that. But this is the employee and employer, so employer and employee contributions for the PERS plans through the Department of Retirement Systems. So Department of Retirement Systems has these different plans that we offer depending on which employee group they fall into. So our general employees fall into PERS. Our LEF plan is specific for firefighters and police. And then we have our Public Safety Employees Retirement System, which is PSERS, is how we say it. And that's specific to our police support officers in our corrections area. So just to give you an idea of what those rates were and what they have just recently changed to effective as of September 2022. Next slide. Okay, and this is the cost of living adjustment history. So to kind of give you an idea of the different employee groups that we have and over the different years, you will see that we've been very consistent, which is extremely happy to see. We want to make sure that we're trying to be as comparable as possible between our different groups. It is not always easy because we do negotiate those union contracts for police, fire, Teamsters Public Works, and Teamsters Marina. So at this time, we do have the COLA set for our union groups for 2023 at 2%, and we will be negotiating all 5 of those contracts during the year of 2023. Okay. And then Human Resources is not really a revenue generating department. We don't really have that ability. So we're usually looking for ways to make sure that we are seeing some cost savings, to make sure that we're reassessing the benefit plans, that we're looking at safety in different ways. So a couple years ago, we were able to implement the HRA VIBA plan, which is a health retirement account, and that's for a select definition of employees. But we are seeing a really great tax savings coming back from that on the city side and also on the employee side. So that's a really great savings for our employees when they are leaving employment and cashing out their sick leave that they're eligible to cash out. On the other side, we are always trying to get wellness grants. That's something that we will continue to do and try to increase. And being part of the Well City designation gets us the 2% annual savings on our health insurance. And for safety, as long as we are doing good in accident reporting and trying to keep our accidents minimized as much as possible, we usually do see a savings on our premium for our workers' comp. And then we do have one request coming forward from Human Resources, which is to add a 0.4 FTE. It's actually not 0.5, sorry about that. A 0.4 FTE, which is a non-benefited position to assist in the HR department. We've definitely seen a need to increase the amount of reporting that we can do, data tracking that we can do, services that we need to provide to our employees, and taking on payroll. It's really given us a little bit of a understanding and more guidance as to what the city could really benefit from. And this is the HR budget. Hard to see, it's a little bit small on the screen, but you can see the 2023 and 2024 years are there on the end. And I think that's my last slide.
All right, thank you, Emma. We'll go on to
Thank you.
our Finance Director, David Goldman. Go ahead.
Okay, back again. So I put small but mighty because I think I heard this at a council meeting a few months ago, so I thought it was funny. So yes, we are a small department, but we do a lot. We have 11 positions. That's staying the same. It's 11 positions now. It'll stay the same through the end of '24. And our accomplishments from the last biennial include transitioning to the state business license service. This was something that we worked, we made presentations to the community, to city council, to show what the impact would be for someone who's paying their business license compared to how they were currently paying it. We're looking forward to the first renewal that'll be coming up in a few months. It'll open up probably late November or December for folks to go into the state system. When they pay their state license, they'll also easily be able to pay the city's license. And we're hoping that there'll be a lot more compliance than in previous years. That's what, when we talked to different cities that went through this, they found that there was additional licenses that were generated based on improved compliance from folks who are just going to this one system to get their business license. Our staff also help customers manage through the end of that, the governor's late fee moratorium that was put in place during the pandemic. There were some accounts that built up hundreds or even thousands of dollars of fees that now that the moratorium was ending, we wanted to work with these folks to make sure that one, we would get our money for all the water and services that we provided them, but two, that they would be able to afford it. And the council in their foresight developed extended payment plans that we're able to roll out to these customers. So instead of the usual 3 to 6 months, we were able to go up to 18 months depending on the amount. And we've been doing pretty well. Customers have been paying it back over time. Some have paid them off. Things are going pretty well with that. And there's still some stressors on our staff when folks call up or they miss a payment or so on. But we're working through it, and we're hoping that we'll be able to report some good news by the end of the year. Just a comparison to where we were at the beginning to where we are at the end. So, looking forward to doing that. We work with our utility rate study consultants and public works and various members of staff. And we had city council meetings to go over the various scenarios for the rate study. And, that culminated in the council approving a decrease, I think it was last month. And we're still talking about the STCs, those connection fees for new development. We'll probably come back to the council during a workshop just to provide some new information based on the feedback we got from city council for us to just share and deliberate and see where it goes from there. And also we were able to manage the ARPA and other grants. We have a grants administrator funded through ARPA. She's doing great. She's taken on a lot. She's worked with the different departments to apply for grants. She's found a whole bunch of grants, brought up to administration, the different department directors, and we brought a bunch up to council already, and we do quarterly reports on that. So, we've done pretty well so far, I think, and we're going to keep pushing and doing our best to find as many grants as possible to help offset these costs of these projects and initiatives that we need to be doing. So there's a little look at our at the number of accounts that we have for our different utilities. See, we have water. It's about 6,500 water, about 6,300 garbage, about another 6,300 sewer, and about 6,300 storm drain. And right now, the delinquent accounts is 778. So we'll be able to report, hopefully, on a decrease to the overall delinquent accounts by the end of the year. And our outlook for 2023, 2024, our biggest project, our major project is the selection and implementation of a new enterprise resource planning system. We thank that the council funded this through the ARPA funding, which actually helped offset costs that would be allocated out to our utility funds and other funds. We're looking forward to finding a good ERP system to bring us up into the year 2023. Right now, we have a decent one right now, but it does need to be improved, and we're hoping that after we go through this entire process, we're able to bring something on board that'll improve our efficiencies and definitely innovate the way we do things now. We've made strategic but conservative investments yielding a substantial increase in earnings, in our interest earnings over previous years. Now, we can't take all the credit for that. The Federal Reserve had something to do with that, raising all those rates. But it does look like by the end of this year, and definitely by the end of next year, we will be able to report a substantial increase in interest earnings over what we were getting over the past few years when interest rates were just almost zero. And we're going to continue to pursue grants, work with departments to pursue grants, and continue to ensure that we manage those grants and meet all the guidelines and all the reporting requirements that these grants have, so we comply with all the requirements. With that, I guess the next department will
Thank you.
be David Cool.
Yeah, thank you, David Goldman. We'll go now to Development Services Director David Cool.
Thank you, Blaine. Mr. Mayor, members of council. David Cool, Development Services Director, here to present our budget. As you can see, we're going to go through accomplishments that we've done the last couple of years. Broken it out into current planning, long-range planning, building. And I did not include code enforcement because Ray Halsey will do a report at the end of the year with a complete package on everything he's done. So in '22, the accomplishments we've had in current planning are the Crosby Trace project, which is 10 buildings, adds up to 37 units on Oak Harbor Road. That is currently going through site civil review. In fact, I think that's been through site civil review and that's approved. Mulberry Place is 62 townhomes on Swantown, and that's been through the hearing examiner. Cedar Hill subdivision is 28 lots on Crosby. That's been through the hearing examiner and is currently going through civil review. Marion Woods, which has been around here a long, long time, is on Swantown, and that just submitted for final plat 2 days ago. So all the infrastructure is built, and they're going through final plat review. And also one that's gained a lot of attention here in town recently is the Glint Car Wash Sonic Drive-In. They just had their hearing examiner hearing right here this morning, and so we'll have a decision on that in a couple of weeks. Long-range planning, those are the projects we bring to you, and those are in the form of an ordinance. The 2021 comp plan CIP amendments were approved by you. If you remember earlier this year, we talked about site-specific rezones. That was approved here. Accessory dwelling units, where we added the capability to not have to have an owner live on site, as well as some industrial amendments was done. Density standards was also approved, and that's part of our housing analysis to make housing more affordable. That's the case where we had smaller lot sizes, smaller setbacks, added more density in town. The Crosby Villa rezone was approved, and the height limit amendment was also approved. That's for art structures on public sites. Building's been a busy activity area. The McKinney Place area on 3rd Street, townhomes that are going in there, I think 19 to 20 of those are currently under construction. The U-Haul storage facility, you have all noticed as you come in on Highway 20, right there at Fackama Road, that's underway. The Hillside Development has started their grading, so they have 6 pads that they have put in and elevated so that you can see them when you're out there. And they have 5 more to go for their model homes. Scenic Heights, by the same developer, has 4 homes under construction. Right here near City Hall, Barrington Oaks Cottages, has 7 homes under construction. And the Habitat for Humanity is just down the road on Ely, 3 homes underway. Another one I added to the list because it was kind of a big deal for all of the city to get finalized, and that was the Rotary Bridge project. Took a lot of effort on a lot of departments' part, particularly Public Works and the Parks Department. Really stepped up to make that happen. So I asked our building official, and she said, make sure we put that on our list. So we did. Ongoing projects, these are projects we've done, but they're also continuing on for next year and the year after. Our new permitting system. I was thinking back, and 2 years ago, right about now, is when the council approved the $100,000 for the new permitting system. And so it's taken us a long time to go out and find a contractor, select them, go through all the steps of our process, and get it all put together. But I have to compliment all the staffs and all the different departments who really helped put this thing together. And it's really starting to gel and work well. There are also a lot of things that we need to fix as we go along because it's technology. And that's where the next step, next bullet is continued Kaizen process improvement. We just finished that last week, and it was over at the Public Works Department. If you were to take the wall about from where Councilman Evans is and go all the way to where Mayor Severns is, we covered the wall in steps of what we do in our permitting process, as well as how we integrate that into our new permitting system. We took 3 full days. We had the engineering group, the planning group, the building group, and we had some other participation from the fire people. Through that process, we identified things that we need to get rid of. We actually added a couple of steps to help us close the loop on communication. So that Kaizen process has been going on here for many years. And when I saw it about a year and a half ago, I saw that as a tool that's going to be very helpful. I think Blaine and Emma both helped get that started back in 2019. And the facilitator, Deborah Heinzen, was really helpful. Very happy with our progress that we've made. So those 2 processes will continue. We'll continue to work on our process and teamwork. The third bullet down is the housing plan, and we want to make sure we continue to implement the housing plan. That's density, like I talked about earlier. Next step was going to go out and do a multifamily tax exemption program for apartment buildings, and that'll be coming up next year. The active transportation plan you've heard of, and the Main Street Association support is something we do specifically in our department. Joint planning area, that's a big one in the UGA, and that will continue as it does every year. New projects, this is our last slide. The downtown marina project revitalization is ongoing. It's fairly new, so we'll develop the scope for that and get that rolling. The economic development staff is new. That's all a program that the mayor asked us to start putting together a plan of what we want to see the new economic development director accomplish. Development code updates, those are constant. We're always in front of you doing those. This next bullet, the state mandated 2025 comp plan. That's mandated by the state. Every 10 years, we need to update our comprehensive plan. It was updated in 2015, but it wasn't adopted here until 2016. So we start these 2 years in advance so we can do all the studies we need to do to get ready. And this is the only bullet that I have here today that'll be talking about numbers. So in this particular item is where we're recommending that we have the council fund $25,000 in 2023 and $25,000 in 2024 as our contribution towards the facilitation of a facilitator, consulting company to come in and help us with the 25 comp plan. And we hope to have the other $100,000 leveraged through the Department of Commerce. They're usually very good about providing grants every year for planning projects. So we hope to have that put together and hire a consultant for that starting in '23. Infrastructure planning is something we always do. And then another big one is the windmill review and inspection. So that's upcoming, and we hope to stay on track with that. So we're available for any questions you may have.
All right, we're going to try to do all the questions at the end here, just to keep the flow going here. So thank you, David Cool. So next one, we'll move on to Parks and Rec Department. So just that last council meeting, you approved your our new Park and Rec Director, Brian Smith, but he's not here yet, of course, and so I'm going to pinch hit here and certainly depend upon our division areas in Marina and Senior Services to kind of split this up. So I'll go ahead and kind of give a quick overview here. Certainly, I've talked about the reorganization and the combining of the 3 divisions there, Parks, Senior Services, and Marina. Here in Parks specific here, we did some one-time transfers here for maintenance and support. For $13,000 and $13,000 per year here. Moving on to Parks Planning Maintenance Contract. Cost is going up there, so I included that into the budget. And then did not add any permanent year-round position, but that's certainly an issue that will remain for discussion here. But they normally have one seasonal, so we're adding 2 more seasonal there. And you can see the cost on the screen there and in the budget for that cost. So with that, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item here, just kind of talking about some of the Parks capital projects here. Flintstone, Portland News, certainly a lot of involvement with the council on that, and so primarily, most of it will be done in 2022, but a little bit carries into 2023. A new project that'll be talked about a little in more detail later on in the capital improvement plans is the Little League field renovation. And then certainly the Harbor Heights development phase is just basically on hold. Cost is a lot higher, so I just kind of left what we had in there before, and certainly that's going to be a major endeavor of our new Parks and Rec director. And then some other ones that just came up recently was discussion with a council member on aerator and some costs that are trying to figure out how to deal with that. And then another council member has brought up the idea of accessible playgrounds. So those are areas that aren't addressed in the budget, but certainly items we'll discuss further. So moving on to another division in Parks and Recreation, we'll go to senior services, and we have our senior service administrator, Liz Lang.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Liz Lang, Senior Services Administrator. Glad to be here and chat a little bit about our achievements and our upcoming plans. So just, can you go back one slide? Sorry. So just briefly, I just want to kind of say, again, just outlining what we do in senior services is that we're this interesting hybrid of human services and recreational programming. We offer a lot of evidence-based fall prevention programs, and really everything that we focus on doing is helping to overcome isolation, keeping people healthy and able to age in place longer. As you know, we have a higher population of older adults in Oak Harbor than the state or even the nation. And so it is a lot of the people that we serve in the community. And we're grateful to be able to be here and to do that and provide this preventative care is what we look at our programming being. Okay, next slide, thank you. So some of the achievements that we've had in these past 2 years, we've been really grateful to have Civic Rec on board and not only using it for our programs and people in senior services, but now also onboarding park facilities, including the different park kitchens and areas that people can reserve, and now we're working towards also adding fields into Civic Rec, which will be wonderful. We did resume in-person programs in June of 2021. We have rebuilt our program offerings to pre-COVID levels and added additional classes and groups that we didn't have before, which is exciting. And we started an in-person meal program this year with the support of our Oak Harbor Senior Center Foundation and grants received from PSE and from Island County. And we have served over 2,000 meals to date through that program. And some of that is the funding that's outlined there, just the support that we provide to the Oak Harbor Senior Center Foundation in acquiring grants. And also, of course, the roof. Thank you for your support in helping us get that roof replaced. And we've hosted in 2021, we had 28 private rentals, and this year we've had 40 and counting. So it's an area that we're looking to increase our revenue and accessibility to the community. Okay, next slide. And so yes, the best is yet to come. And while we're really grateful for the roof, we are more than a roof and even more than a building and programs that we offer. We, in addition to the amazing programs and services we provide in our building, we provide a high level of advocacy for older adults. We serve, myself and my staff members serve on community councils, helping to advocate for additional funding through state and federal funds to keep programs happening in the community, working to find gaps in services for older adults and fill those gaps as well. And so a couple of the items in our decision packages that have been put forward to your consideration, as well as our personnel requests, does include the 4 part-time fitness instructors, so 4.25 FTE each for a total of 1. And really what this is to do is right now, our fitness classes are taught by instructors that contract with us. We have professional services agreements with them. But it's kind of a cumbersome process for them. For people who want to come in and just teach a couple fitness classes, they have to have a local and state business license, as well as pay for their own insurance. And so when you have someone who is already qualified to teach our classes, and they come in and they're excited and say, hey, can I teach a couple classes here a week? And yes, you can. And as soon as we show them that list of things they have to do, they kind of back down. And so it's been difficult for us to keep fitness instructors for this purpose. So what we're looking to do is be able to offer the option of, okay, you can contract with us and you will get $30 per class taught, which is what we offer. Or you can sign on to be a .25 employee of the city, less than 10 hours a week, no benefits, and we offset the costs of our workers' comp and L&I that we would be paying, so then their hourly rate is less. It'd be about $20 per hour instead of $30 per hour class taught. So really, this isn't a change in our expenditures, it's flexibility so that we can better provide staff for our programs and keep those programs going. Because in addition to the classes that we have now, we are still trying to increase our offerings in our classes. We have the demand. These fitness classes are very well attended. They're pretty much at capacity, the ones that we offer. We have an enhanced fitness class. We actually offer two, one that's a low impact and one that's a full-fledged fitness class. And then we have our yoga and Tai Chi, and we have anywhere from 15 to 20, which is really the cap you want for one fitness instructor to teach those classes. So the demand is there to add additional classes in the afternoon, but we need options of attracting these fitness instructors. The other ask in our decision packages, it's listed as for fitness classes, but it also includes additional programs like our pickleball group. So we're looking at continuing to, as we did prior to COVID, we rented space at the Oak Harbor Christian School, their gym, to play pickleball indoor. And so their cost has gone up, and we're looking to restart that pickleball program and allow for indoor pickleball throughout the winter and throughout the summer. And so we're wanting to increase those program costs. And again, those class costs are offset by the revenue that comes in from these programs. Same with our fitness classes. The fitness class and pickleball, both the revenue from those programs offset the costs that we're asking to increase in our expenses. And then the last one on our decision package was an increase for our modular building. There's some maintenance items that we would like to do to keep that modular building up to par of where it should be. And now that we do have an increase of revenue through a full-time rental to Island Senior Resources and Northwest Regional Council, we're asking to be able to spend a little more to take care of that building, which again is being offset by the revenue that we're collecting for those rentals. So that we're doing a lot, and we're excited. We're excited about the possibilities that are coming for growth and expanding services to our community as part of the Parks and Recreation Department, and looking forward to welcoming our Parks and Recreation Director, Mr. Brown.
Smith.
Brian Smith. I was mixed that up. I was like, it's something so simple. We're looking forward to working with Brian Smith. We were grateful to meet him. We enjoyed that process and looking forward to working with him.
All right. Thank you, Liz Lang. We'll go ahead and go on to our Harbor Master, Chris Sublett, who's in the Marina Division, and he's also reminding him that he's also the Marina Enterprise Fund. Go ahead, and Chris.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, Chris Sublett, Harbor Master. Yes, just a reminder, we are part of the enterprise funding system within the city. We're self-supported, and we don't receive any taxpayer funds. The big workhorses for the marina are the moorage, the sheds, and then, of course, our fuel sales. Next slide. So what's happening at the marina, what's the trends in 2021, and this is revenue from January through September. 2021, we had about 1.4 million. In 2022, we had about 1.6 million in revenue. It's about a 9% increase, so things are definitely on the rise. And as part of that, we took out some of the bond payments that we had received and stuff like that. Just as a reference, the revenue in 2020 was 1.3 million. So you can see the revenue is climbing. When you look at the occupancy, it's holding steady at 89%. So what this means is that when we look at the marina revenue, it's not just mortgage that's increasing, but it's also other things such as fuel sales and the shed rentals and stuff like that. It's been extremely busy at the marina. Next slide. So in 2021, 2022, we did a number of capital improvement projects. We put in the security cameras, we improved the Wi-Fi, we put card locks on the restrooms, did a bunch of breakwater repairs. We installed some new pile guides on the breakwater, and we also put in some fish pens, which were a project that we worked on that weren't necessarily a capital improvement project, but they were so much fun and so cool, we decided to put them in here just so you could see what they look like as well. Next slide. When you talk about the marina budget, there's many factors that go into it, and it's a little different than some of the other cities. One thing we have to remember is the economy as we look at the marina budget. We have to realize that the mortgage bill, the shed bill, a lot of that stuff is largely disposable income. And if things got tough, it's likely to be the last bill paid. We have to consider the fuel costs, the price, and how much we're going to sell. Seems like just a couple of years ago, we were selling diesel at less than $1 a gallon. Now it's over $5.50 a gallon. So it's a huge swing. And of course, the cost drives our price. So when it costs more, we sell it for more, but it really doesn't change the amount of profit that we make. And then transient boaters. Is the Canada border open? Is the US border open? You know, what's happening with that? And then the last thing is the weather. What's the weather like? You know, are we going to have a summer that's windy and wet, or are we going to have a summer like we had that's fantastic? The interesting thing about all of these factors is that we can't control any of them. They're just, we have to work around them. So next slide. In 2023 and 24, the marina rates, we do anticipate a 3% increase minimum, but we are currently having a business plan completed, which will include some rate recommendations. It's likely that the Marina Advisory Committee is going to review the results of that business plan, and then we'll have a recommendation to the City Council for our rates, and that's likely to happen in December, January timeframe, and then the increase could be effective January, February timeframe. Next slide. Along with the basic marina rates, there's also the dredge fee increase that we're going to have to also put into place. As you might recall, we did refinance the dredge bond, and that was amazing. We got ourselves down to a 0.89 interest rate. We saved approximately $194,000. And what it did for us is it allowed us to pay it off in half the time. But it does mean that we do need to increase the dredge fee each year. So with the rate increase I just talked about, the 3%, there will also be an increase to the dredge fee. We're currently in year one, which is $1.31 per foot. And then in year two, that's the next increase, it's going to be $1.60, year three, $1.88, and year four, $2.16. So there'll be a bit of a spike in that area as well. Next slide. So the marina budget methodology, we looked at the year-to-date totals. And again, the marina budget is a moving target. It's so difficult to predict so much of this stuff. We compared the year-to-date totals to our budgeted amounts, and we increased some and decreased some. And then we just made a base revenue and expense increase of 3% based on that. For requests of capital projects, we have 4 in 2023. We do not have any in 2024. And then again, it's already been covered. We'd like to add one more seasonal person in the summer, and that's going to be about $15,000 each year. Next slide. So our budget, you've seen the numbers. The budgeted revenue in 23 is going to be nearly $1.9 million, and this is a 3% increase. And the expense is going to be $2.2 million, and that's a 3% increase over the base budget. But there are some bond and project expenses in there as well. In 2024, again, a 3% increase to 1.9. And then the expenses will also be raised up as well, 3% to nearly $2 million. And again, the bond dredge was refinanced, and that's a reason that the expenses are a little higher than expected. Next slide. So moving forward, the capital improvement projects that we're hoping for in 2023 is the dredging study. That's going to be about $300,000. About $150,000 of that will come from the ARPA funds. And this will be the part of the dredging where we're doing the planning, getting the permits, doing the surveying, those sort of things. We're also still working on the boatyard purchase, and that's in negotiations. We have some more FDOC storm damage repair to do. It's going to be about $225,000, and that's an insurance claim with a $25,000 deductible. We also would like to do some main walkway repairs. This is going to be about $250,000, and it's going to come from Marina reserves. So all of these are projects that we really need to complete to keep the marina going and keep it just floating and operating as it should. So next slide.
Thank you, Chris Sublette. So we're moving on now to Public Works Director Steve Schuler. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. It's the top of the ninth inning, so we're almost there. And so knowing that we have gone through a lot of, there's no spreadsheets that I have. So Public Works is 7 divisions. As you know, Parks is going to be a new division here pretty soon. We still are their landlord, and so the division director and the Parks Department will be at Public Works. We'll be handling a lot of their equipment, their materials, their supplies, their vehicles. So we'll still be joined at the hip, and that'll be very exciting moving forward. Go ahead, Tim. All right, so I'm just going to go over really, instead of getting into a lot of different details, and I really invite each of the council members. It's been great to meet with many of you one-on-one, and our community leaders and our citizens and our business leaders to come and ask us questions anytime. We're here to answer your specific questions. There's a lot going on in 7 divisions, so I'm trying to pretend to cover that all. I'm just going to skip it overall and just invite you to be further involved in those areas that you're interested in. And then, as you know, CAC is going to go over the capital improvement plan here right after this discussion, so we'll get into those capital projects in more detail. So just 4 things that we need to do that you know, that we all know, in order to have a successful budget. So it's one thing to have it, but it's another thing to implement it. So number 1 is to set priorities. And I really like Stephen Covey. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that's really true in local government. And so I've kind of got a silo here. There's always 1,000 things that citizens want us to do. You can only afford to do 100 if you're lucky in good economic times, and you only can do 60 in the bad economic times. That's the reality every year, year after year, right? Sometimes it's more than 1,000, depending on who you're talking to. So that's what it is. So I really appreciate the council and the mayor working together since last spring to help identify priorities, talk about those. I saw kind of the recapping of those. That's very exciting. That really helps us because we really are focused on what you want to get done. We listen to what you're saying. I know it's a priority when you call me or you email me. It suddenly becomes a priority. It may not have been a priority before I saw your email. That's the way it works. There might have been other priorities, but things change based on your input. So keep that up, please. Number 2 is continue to do this. This is where I see, because we've had a lot of transition in Public Works, because we've had a number of leadership changes, we really need to focus on long-term planning. It is just not in place where it should be. And so we need to continue to dream big, set goals, and take action, and bring the community into that and have them be part of that. But that is critical. That's the number 1 thing when I come in every week that just hits me on the head, is the need for this long-range planning. Next. All right, I'm just going to tell a quick story. You guys know this. In Public Works especially what's going on in the next years with all the technology changes, with all the demographic changes, economic changes, we need the freedom to innovate. And so when I was in Snohomish in 2003, They were sued and entered it into a U.S. District Court consent decree with the federal courts. I arrived in 2008, 5 years later, and they had not completed everything they needed to do. So we had to enter in an agreed order for our wastewater treatment plant because we had had so many violations before I got there. And so, just like anyway, they had put together a program to build a project that was tens of millions of dollars, $40 to $50 million. They had hired one consultant that said, rebuild your plant for $40 to $50 million. Another consultant said, take all your waste to the city of Everett for $40 to $50 million. I was in an environment in the city of Snohomish where we were free to innovate. We were free, we felt the freedom to bring up new ideas and to bounce those off, and things that were risky and things that maybe are, may not work out. But I was able to constantly bring new ideas. What if we did this? Here's the issue, and have that dialogue over time. We really need that. And so instead of spending $40 to $50 million on our wastewater treatment plant, we spent 4.8. 3.5 million came from a grant, a proviso grant that we got from our state legislatures, and the rest, 1.3, came in, somewhere else. But that's what we spent to upgrade our plant. It's still in place 10 years later, and we've been able to do a utility rate reduction, making it zero, or actually do a rate reduction when the time that I was there. And so that's really important to us. We need to have that freedom to come to you and have ideas and discuss those with you. And I know I'm really encouraged by the dialogues we've had already that I see that freedom in you, because it is going to be a really changing environment going forward. I don't think it's going to be same old, same old. We're going to have to address new challenges, and none of us are going to know what the answer is. So really need that. Thank you. Last slide. And so to do that, we all have to work, and I really appreciate the council and the mayors and Blaine and Emma's and the other directors. I really see that we are all focused on creating a culture of high trust. I really see that, so thank you, and we just need to keep that up. That's it.
All right, thank you, Steve Schuler. And then now we have Creative Arts. Gideon Kaufman, our archaeologist, is trying to be proactive, and so we're really, instead of coming over time, some of the routine issues, we're just going to talk about it and put it in the budget. So go ahead, Gideon Kaufman.
Hey, thank you, Blaine, Mr. Mayor, Council. It's wonderful to see you. So Creative Arts Fund, we are developing a budget, as Blaine had mentioned, so that's really exciting. So some accomplishments that were done in 2021 and 2022. We have bi-monthly meetings, meaning that we meet every other month. The installation of TOW, so that is up by Scenic Heights entrance. That also includes an interpretive sign. We have the permits for Temple Blue. I've sent out invitations to bid twice now. This last run, I sent it to 80 different firms, and we're asking for bids on 10/18, so in a couple of weeks. Also applied for permits for Pat McVeigh's Acorn, and I believe I have those in hand. And those expire in April, so the Acorn's going to be getting installed here pretty soon. Other than that, of course, presentations to you folks, which is always a delight. One element was with the Kinnebrew collection is meditation. The top piece wasn't attached, so we need to send that out for repairs. We were going to either have it auctioned off or scrap it, but after it got repainted, it really revitalized the commission and I think other folks in Oak Harbor. So that's still kind of an indecision. We're going to take it to Superior Systems and have them look at it, or bring them out here to look at all these pieces. All right, next slide. The Acorn, as I mentioned, we did go for permits. There's Pat tracing the acorn leaf in order to help with the installation, which that'll be happening in a couple of weeks. In addition to that, we also had to get a certificate of elevation to determine if it's in the FEMA flood zone. All right, next slide. All right, so for the budget, we are going to be sending the Parks Department some maintenance money. We're starting with $5,000 for both years. The pieces need to be appraised just to kind of get an idea of what we have and what kind of insurance we need and those kind of needs. Additional professional services that might also dump into the appraiser. $5,000, this is really wonderful for the Oak Harbor School District for both years. Ideally, I envision that the money goes to the school district, to their arts program, and then have the school district write us a letter or just kind of short summary as far as how that money was used. $300 for both years for a table at the music festival. $1,500 for both years to reamp Driftwood Days. And then another $1,500 for both years as discretionary funds, again, to avoid having to go to council so often. I believe that, yep, last slide.
Thank you, Gideon Kaufman. So, Mayor, that concludes the staff presentation here, so back to you.
Thank you, Blaine, and to staff. Before I turn to the council for questions or comments, we have both of our, we have Mr. Cool in the back and Mr. Schuler, who most recently spoke. And I think it was the David Cool who talked about the Kaizen study. And I can tell you that during my first term as mayor, now the Kaizen study comes from the state of Washington. They send people to us. The lady that came during my first term, we had different staff, and her experience was one of almost shock. She said that Oak Harbor was not organized as it pertained to, or I guess I better be careful of the words I choose, but I won't say unorganized, but we're obviously not working together. It was an experience like she had never, almost never experienced going in to try to help a city, which she had been doing for 5 years or plus at that time. And she said it was, the departments were not working together, were not willing to work together, and she tried her best, and I think we had some staff that are still with us today that learned some things certainly from that first experience. Well, that same lady was just back and had almost completely the opposite remark on her way out the door, saying that, oh my gosh, your staff is working together. They're obviously excited about opportunities and ways to make things better. So my hat's off to you, the two of you, and not just the two, but both departments and all of the people involved, because that was a great turnaround for me to see and hear. So thank you very much for that. A lot of numbers today, a lot of presentations. So I'm going to turn to council for council comments and questions and/or any kind of input that you might have at this point. And maybe we can take a short break after that. But council, anybody got anything at this point that you want to talk about regarding the budget? Yes, Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question regarding the streets capital budget, annual street improvements. It looks like we typically, and this is outside of the TBD, typically we had been, I think, had roughly about $500,000 budgeted in there for street operations annually, but then in fiscal year 23 and 24, and for the rest of you, this is in the back of the packet, in the breakouts on page 32, we dropped that to $50,000, and then we go back up to $400,000 the following year for street operations.
So, Mr. Goldman, would you address that? I know he did some budget plan changing to kind of make that a better process. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I could address that. I just need to know what page did you say you were looking on?
Page 32 of the capital project breakdown.
Page 32, the capital project breakdown. Huh. I'm still trying to find it. There's a page number in the bottom right-hand corner on every page of the budget book.
Oh,
Are you-
115.
115, okay, that's more straightforward, okay. So annual street improvement. Okay, yeah. So what we did for 23 and 24 is we're using REIT 2 funding for that. And we're using only 50,000 from Fund 101, which is the streets operating fund. That's the fund that receives the motor vehicle fuel taxes and the CAPRON funds.
So we're basically using REIT 2 for those two so it looks like in fiscal year 23, we have $1 million. We had 1.6 going into that fund for 2022, drops to $1 million in 2023, being offset with some REIT funds, drops then to $500,000 moving forward. So we've reduced that budget by, $650,000 the first year and 1.1 million moving forward, and I'm just trying to figure out how
Oh,
we're funding
all
that
right,
reduction.
so the way to read that, the first column where it says spent to date, that's the total amount spent in that particular project, which is the annual street improvement project, to date. So that's all that means. So that's just the addition of a couple of years, maybe 3 years, from when the project started, which I guess was a few years ago, to the date that this was published. That's all that means. That's not a budget. That's just like actual spent to date. The next column says BFB. That means beginning fund balance. And you'll see that $500,000 in the bottom row where it says project BFB. That's that same 500,000. So in reality, 2023 is $500,000 of new money and $500,000 of like carry forward money that's currently unspent in the project. So it's really 500,000 of new money in 23 and then 500,000 of new money in 24. It's the same amount, except that BFB just means like carry forward money that's currently sitting in the balance of that project that's not spent.
Okay, ultimately, I guess what I'm getting at is this is our, general maintenance fund outside of the TBD, and we had made a promise to the taxpayers when they approved TBD that we weren't going to divert the existing funds that we were using for street maintenance someplace else and just use the TBD funds. In other words, the TBD funds were additional funds we were using to enhance the drivability of our streets. I'm just making sure we're keeping that commitment we made to the taxpayers who so graciously granted us those funds through their vote. So would that be a correct statement, Mr. Goldman?
Oh, yeah, there's no TBD funds in this project. I mean, this is all, the REIT funds are a separate funding source. Those aren't TBD funds. That's separate.
Well, and I
So, yeah,
get
there's
that,
no-
and again, maybe
There's no TBD funds in this project.
maybe my question wasn't clear enough. The funds that are in the street maintenance, those are the same amount of funds as we've had in years past. We haven't decreased our street capital funds any, separate of the TBD, right? Again, I understand the TBD and the street capital, two separate funds. I just want to make sure we haven't robbed Peter to pay Paul, that we're still funding our street improvements with some of the money that we had in our budget previously, and the TBD has all been additional funds, because that's the commitment we made to the taxpayers.
Yeah, and I can
Yeah.
add, thank you, Councilmember, that in Public Works, yes, the local streets are being preserved using the Transportation Benefit District funds, and our arterials are not. We are not using the TBE funds. Those are using the funds that you're referencing right there. Those are arterial funds. So, right, we are keeping those separate, and we are not funding our arterials with the Transportation Benefit District.
Yeah, and TBD is on page 128, and we continue the commitment we made to the voters we had on that. But we did talk to you about the issue with the revenue from our artillery funds and for our for our operations and street fund has been going down. So that previous one you're talking about is funded by streets funding and by the Capron funding, what we're having issues with. But we're not subsidizing or moving out. We're keeping our commitment here on page 128 for the Transportation Benefit District. So we said that was for local roads, and we're spending it on local roads for that 2% that was done by the voter. And David Goldman, you're welcome to make sure I said that correctly. So.
Yeah, that's correct. I was going to point to the TBD project, but you beat me to it.
Yeah.
Well, and again, thanks for that, and I know that those TBDs are going to local roads. I just want to make sure we haven't pulled, any money out of the street fund, that TBD was truly an enhancement on top of the existing funds that we'd had in the street projects prior, and that we're not moving those funds elsewhere, because again, that was the commitment we made as part of that TBD, that would be above and beyond our annual street maintenance budget that we had prior to the establishment of the TBD.
Yeah, to make sure we do it, we count for it separately, and that's why you see Fund 108 there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wiesner. Councilor Hoffmeyer.
That was a lot that went on there, that was a question that I had as well. I think, and I think it's been answered there. Page 5 of the packet, that'd be the final page of the mayor's letter. The first paragraph there really answers that very well. It states, one fund that we are keeping a close eye on is the streets fund, which is primary funded by state motor vehicle tax-based revenues that have stagnated or dropped since their peak in '07. As a result, we are recommending reducing the level of roadway improvements funded by these funds and diligently leveraging grants, real estate excise taxes, REIT, and continue to look for other solutions to try to keep up with project and operational needs. So I think staff did a good job of answering it there. David, is there anything you would like to add to that kind of clarifies that we are, that we are meeting our obligations and then some, hopefully?
Oh, yeah, we're definitely meeting our obligations, and we do a report every year. The Public Works Department goes in and talks about the projects that were completed the prior year, and then talks about projects that'll come up. And the Finance Department does an accounting presentation every May or June when all the books are closed regarding what was spent for the TBD funds. That's actually required per the TBD resolution or ordinance that was adopted by the City Council a few years ago that the voters voted on. So that's what we do every year. We present to the City Council what was spent, like how much was spent, on TBD projects.
Awesome. Thank you for that. The only thing I would ask is that, I'm glad that we're leveraging those grants, REIT funds, et cetera. And I would hope that we make sure that at least $500,000 is going into that on top of the TBD. Thank you.
Any other, not seeing any other questions or comments. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break. That be all right? Okay, we'll come reconvene then at 3:48. Thank you. No, that's right. I know, yeah. Okay, I'm going to reconvene this workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. After a short break, we're back in session here now. Moving on our agenda to the section for development services. And we have our 2022 comprehensive plan amendments / capital improvement plan. And I believe we have our principal planner, Kat Kamak. Kat, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Kat Kamak, Principal Planner, here to provide a presentation on the capital improvements plan. Great presentation by all the departments and the finance department on the budget. So with that, we'll flow into the capital improvements plan. And this is a plan that we adopt as part of our comprehensive plan amendments every year. So let's jump right into it. What I'll do is cover each of the funds that are in the capital improvements plan and keep it short by just addressing what the differences are primarily between last year's plan and this year. So we can focus on the differences if needed, or if the council is interested in discussing any projects that are in the CIP further, we could do that as well. So without further ado, I have a short presentation. I'll share my screen. Here we go. All right. What's in the capital improvements plan? The capital improvements plan has capital facilities that are greater than $50,000. That includes expenditure of public funds and has a life expectancy of 20 years. Similarly, a capital maintenance project is greater than $50,000 with an expenditure of public funds and life extension of 10 years. So in your budget, you may have a lot of projects, but the capital improvements plan focuses only on the projects that are greater than $50,000. And as our finance director alluded in his presentation, there are some REIT dollars that are supposed to be listed in the capital improvements plan, and so we accommodate that as an exception if they're below $50,000. So that's the kind of distinction between the capital improvements plan and the budget. So we'll jump right into the different funds. The street funds, all these sheets are provided to the council in the workshop packet. I believe it starts around page 203 or 204. So feel free to refer to that document if the numbers on the screen are too small to see. I will focus on the changes. The changes, primarily new projects that are added to this fund, is the traffic calming project. This is something that our Public Works Department experiences every year, projects and calls from citizens requesting small projects to improve either safety or slow traffic down. And this is something that is good to budget for and be prepared for in the coming years. And so this is something new that has been added to the streets budget. One of the stats that I try to share with the council every year is the amount of unsecured funding that is in every fund. That kind of sometimes is many projects, and it's sometimes one project that carries the big amount based on grant funding. The unsecured funding are primarily grants. Basically, we have a project scheduled in the next 6 years that we don't have fully funded with city dollars, and we have to rely on grants to support or fund that project. So in the streets fund, we have about 30% funds that are unsecured at this time over the next 6 years. This is the Parks and Recreation Fund. In this fund, some of the changes this year, the Little League fields have been added. I think the city administrator alluded to that in the Parks Department presentation. And if you look at this fund, you can see that there's almost 65 plus% of the funding is unsecured. Most of this is primarily due to the Harbor Heights project. This project is currently on hold status. The cost estimates and design options for this complex is the costs are getting more and more with the current economic state, so it's currently on hold. But that is the major share of the unsecured funding in this fund. We have the wastewater system. This is a utility fund, and so funded by our utility rates. So there's less projects here that depend on grants and so on. So the unsecured funds are less here. System funds like water and storm do have some systematic developments that are programmed through the planning process. So no new projects have been added to this fund. The wastewater system, some of the changes going forward this year is actually a project was removed from this fund. We had the North Whidbey Sewer Expansion Fund, expansion project in the last CIP that has been removed. And a couple projects have been added to this fund regarding the clean water facility. The facility screens have been added this year, and then inflow and infiltration grant project has been added as well. The stormwater system fund has no changes this year. Pretty much most of the projects that were programmed in the last CIP is moving forward with implementation. The Marina Fund, here again, a couple minor changes to this fund. Actually, a couple projects were removed, beach armoring project and the stormwater improvement project. I think these were a joint project with the county and were dependent on grant funding, but these projects didn't move forward and so have been removed from the current CIP moving forward. The General Government Fund, this one has quite a bit of changes, and I think some of the changes were discussed at some of the department presentations. Added to this fund is the police department remodel, the broadband study that was mentioned in the department discussion. The downtown study discussion, again, this came out of the city council goals priority. There were several goals that referred to either the downtown or the marina. The scope of this is yet to be determined. Since this is a high priority, this has been added into this fund to get that discussion started. We also have the Pioneer Way EPA study for a couple properties and the potential for redevelopment there. As the Director of Development Services discussed the comprehensive plan update, the state mandated 2025 update is coming up, and that has been also added to this fund, and so is the City Hall remodels. So in this fund, there's about 15% unsecured funding, a large percent, and there's also the West Side Fire Station bond in here, and so there's also the 80% of funds that are dependent on the board-approved bond. So that's the general government. And then we have the Senior Center Fund, no changes since last year, just the roof replacement project that's ongoing, and a plan to redo the parking lot there that has some challenges for ADA and so on. So that in brief is a summary of what's in the changes that are considered in this year's CIP. I will stop sharing my screen and back over to the council chambers for any questions, comments, or thoughts on the CIP. I can bring back any of these sheets for discussion if anybody has questions. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, CAC. So I'll turn to council and we'll entertain questions or comments. Okay, not seeing a great deal. You must have answered all their questions there, CAC. Nice job. I assume moving forward, we'll probably accumulate a few more questions as we move on in this budget, but great. We will move then to the city administrator's report.
All right, thank you, Mayor and City Council. Oak Harbor City Administrator Blaine Oborn, just kind of giving, I'll briefly kind of go over some of the items in here. Certainly we have the monthly metrics, and then towards the back there on page 293, we have the monthly report here. So highlighting some of the things here, legislative outreach. So one of the issues, one of the really goals here of the mayor and working with staff and city council was the sewer fund debt relief. We have that $7 million over our head, and if we can get some grant funding to pay that off early or to forgiveness or a longer period of time. So I appreciate council members for advocating that, and so I was able to advocate that today at the COG, Council of Governments meeting with the legislatures on the federal and state level. So I went ahead and plugged that. So that's a major importance, and I think that's something that would really help out the ratepayers with a excessively high sewer bill. So moving on to development services here, the mayor kind of took my thunder here, but certainly we want to brag about the great things our new staff are doing with department heads. And so with having two new department heads, David Kuhl and Steve Schuler here, so we had a turnaround from what we had in 2019 with looking how to play together and how to coordinate together between departments. And that's really been a challenge and a weakness that I think we're really making some strides in improving that area here. And certainly the customers we serve in that area are the ones that benefit from that streamlined process of working together. So great win-win for the community, the staff, and for council and administration. So moving on to human resources here, annual all-hands meeting for all employees at Elks Lodge, November 3rd, so from 11 to 1. And council is invited. I think we've had 3 RSVPs already, and so I think our city clerk went ahead and assumed it's going to be 4 or more, so we've already went and had the possible quorum notice of that. Certainly, it's part of our annual event here with employees, and so it's a presentation by staff, by leadership, in working with our employees. So great opportunity for us to meet together. We've done it in the past with, unfortunately, with COVID, with doing it taped or remote. And so I think that we're looking forward to doing this in person and getting back to what we did in 2019. So. And then certainly we talked about on the Parks and Recreation, our new Parks and Rec Director, Brian Smith, will begin employment on November 30th. So with that, that's all I'm going to highlight. So any questions? Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn, for that and for that continuing report that you do on a continuing basis. We appreciate it. So I'll turn to council for any other business. I can't hardly believe that it's 4:03 in the afternoon. I thought we might be here at 6 o'clock. So maybe I should just shut up and adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much for your time. And I want to say, again, I want to say to staff, I know these are trying times. We do certainly have a state audit going on. We do We do service our regular needs, and then we're trying to prepare this budget, so I know that it puts some additional stress on you and your staff, so thank you very much. You are fabulous, and we appreciate you. Thank you, staff, and thank you, council. Thank you, citizens. We're adjourned.